I've always been drawn to rivers. I guess, I don't know, maybe growing up in river country and spending a lot of time catching crawdads and fishing with my grandpa has given me an affinity to places like this. The river that you see here behind me is the Mississippi River. And it's kind of wild to think that there was a time before interstates and highways and rail traffic when the rivers were the main arteries of travel on the North American continent. Well, here, just beyond the Mississippi River on the other side, flowing into it is the Missouri River. And it was from this spot, or a place very near, where one of the greatest adventures in American history would kick off. When Meriwether Lewis and William Clark and their Corps of Discovery would start an exploration to the interior of the North American continent through the Missouri River. As I mentioned, we are near the confluence of the Missouri and Mississippi rivers. And in 1802, Thomas Jefferson was the president of the United States. And he had got a hold of an account from a Scottish explorer by the name of Mackenzie, who had traveled from Quebec all the way to the Pacific coast. And in this account, Thomas Jefferson reads about all the things that he saw and was pretty excited by, this account of this explorer. But there was also something in it that kind of disturbed him a little bit. In Mackenzie's account, he suggested that the British needed to start looking to expand their influence to the west, take advantage of the fur trade, and kind of secure a wider spot on the American continent. So with that, Thomas Jefferson got the idea that rather than the British occupying that area, it needed to be the Americans who would expand west. And to do that, he needed to get a hold of an area that was known as the Louisiana Territory. Currently, I am standing on the east bank of the Mississippi River, which is in Illinois, and right over there is the state of Missouri. But in 1802, well, that would have been the property of the Spanish. So Thomas Jefferson knew that there was going to be this land transfer that was going to be taking place between the Spanish and the French. So he made a kind of a secret deal with the French to purchase the Louisiana Territory for $15 million as soon as ownership transferred from the Spanish to the French. That deal was made, I believe, in April of 1803. So even before that, well, Jefferson and his secretary, Meriwether Lewis, started talking and making plans for an exploration that would take place up the Missouri River, where you can see right over there where the Missouri River is dumping into the mighty Mississippi. So Meriwether Lewis set out in August of 1803 from Pittsburgh, went down the Ohio River, stopped in Louisville, Kentucky in October of 1803, and there he met up with William Clark. So Meriwether Lewis, he was a woodsman. He had military experience. Clark also was a good riverman and was a skilled map maker. Also with Clark was going to be his slave, a guy by the name of York. And they would be picking up some different guys along the way, recruiting them for what was called the Corps of Discovery. And they would make their way down the Ohio River get to the Mississippi, and then would make their way up in this direction. Now, they got up around the St. Louis area around December of 1803, but found that this area across the river was still owned by the Spanish. So they kind of had to camp out on this side of the river until transfer of ownership took place in the spring of 1804. We've moved up off of the river just a little bit, and with Lewis and Clark and what was called the Corps of Discovery having to wait until the transfer of ownership from Spain to France took place, well, they decided to set up a winter encampment over on the east side of the river. And right here, again, just up off of the river, well, they have a monument for the Lewis and Clark expedition. I don't know when this monument was put up or how long it's been here, but it gives us a little bit of information, and it's kind of worn and it's also kind of wet today, so it's a bit difficult for me to read. And it says, near here at Camp Dubois, the Lewis and Clark detachment spent the winter of 1803 to 1804. They left on May 14th, 1804, and ascended the Missouri. And then it gets a little bit difficult for me to read there. But anyway, it's close to this spot where they are going to set out from. And if we go over here, and man, I should have wore some better footwear today. There's a bunch of nasty mud all over here. Yeah. But anyway, there's this helpful piece of signage here that kind of, well, it shows the keelboat that Meriwether Lewis and Clark and the Corps of Discovery would have used. This was a keelboat that was designed by Meriwether Lewis, and they also had a couple of other boats to help haul supplies. But anyway, the Mississippi and Missouri River today looks different than it did in the early 1800s. The river has meandered just a bit. So anyway, right here you can see the Mississippi River today. Well, it would have been slightly to the west in the early 1800s, and the same thing with the Missouri River. The Missouri River was slightly north, and over time has shifted to the south. So Camp Dubois, the winter encampment for Lewis and Clark, technically is kind of out there in the river. Now, if anyone has watched this channel for any amount of time, you know that I'm really big into artifacts, so I'm always on the lookout for things like that. And check this out. I may have just found Lewis and Clark's portable toilet seat right here on the banks of the Mississippi River. That is crazy. I got to do some looking into it, but if that's the real deal, I'll have this up on eBay for anyone who's interested. Now, even though the original site of the winter encampment is out in the middle of the river now, doesn't mean that there isn't some stuff here that we can't learn from. Close by, there is an interpretive center that we're going to visit, and they also have a reconstruction of what the winter encampment would have looked like. So we're going to dodge over to the interpretive center and see what else we can learn about Lewis and Clark and the Corps of Discovery. We just entered into the interpretive center here, and one of the first things that greets us is this sculpture or statue of Lewis and Clark. And I forgot to mention that also on this journey is going to be Meriwether Lewis's dog. It was a Newfoundland dog, and Then we start looking at some of the displays here. And there's quite a bit in this museum that we are going to be looking at. We're not going to be able to hit everything, but we'll get what we can before we go outside and look at the winter encampment. But here we have a portrait of Thomas Jefferson, who is going to be commissioning this trip. And here there's a quote that says, "The object of your mission is to explore the Missouri River and principal stream of it, as by its course and communication with the waters of the Pacific Ocean, may offer the most direct and practical water communication across the continent." So that's going to be the main mission of the Corps of Discovery. And then over here, here is a portrait of William Clark, and then Jefferson's secretary, Meriwether Lewis. And then here, what we are looking at is a map. I mentioned how there was a Scottish explorer by the name of Alexander Mackenzie who had gone from Quebec to the Pacific. So this is a map that was made, it says in 1802 by Aaron Arrowsmith, using the information that Mackenzie and another guy by the name of Vancouver had come up with. But as you can see, a lot of this Louisiana Purchase territory is a big blank. Okay, so this was a big mystery for the men of the Corps of Discovery. We've just made our way into the first room here in the museum, which is entitled Visions for the Expedition. And as you make your way through this room, well, they ask a lot of questions that the Corps of Discovery and Lewis and Clark must have been asking themselves, like, what must we do to prepare? This was going to be just an enormous undertaking into what was relatively unknown territory. It was going to be a year and a half to 2 years that these men were going to be embarking on this expedition. And here's some other questions that they may have been asking themselves. Who lives in the West? So one of the missions of the Corps of Discovery was to make contact with the Native American tribes of the West and to start establishing relations with them. They didn't know, who's peaceful, who is hostile. And during the journey, here you can see a bunch of these different tribes listed. During the journey, the Corps would become aware of 56 different Indian nations. So you have like the Oto and the Cheyenne and the Arikara, Lakota. All right, so all of these different Native American tribes would be encountered by the Lewis and Clark expedition. Here's probably their main mission, is trying to find out, is there a water route to the Pacific? If you look at, trying to get to the West Coast during this period of time, well, you would have to set out from the east and go all the way around South America and then come up on the Pacific side. So if a water route could be found over land that could cut that time, well, that would be absolutely revolutionary. All right. So seeking out this Northwest Passage was probably the primary mission of the Corps of Discovery. And then also, this is going to be a scientific expedition as well. Okay, so asking questions of geology, like how large are what were called the Stony Mountains, what we know as the Rocky Mountains today. They'd heard reports from French trappers and some of the other explorers who had kind of been out in that area. Also, what plants and animals live there. Okay, they didn't know what was out west. There was, questions of how, are there woolly mammoths that are still out there? Are there volcanoes and salt towers and all of these different weird things? Okay, so this is going to be a scientific expedition as well. I mentioned how Meriwether Lewis is going to be setting out from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in August of 1803. And here on this display, it talks about his journey down the Ohio River. Okay, so you see this keelboat going down the Ohio. He's going to link up with Clark in Louisville, Kentucky, and all along the way, they're going to be recruiting members to this Corps of Discovery, men who could lend their experience and talents to the mission and were up for a big adventure. Okay, then they get down here to the confluence of the Ohio and the Mississippi River, and then they are going to go up until they get to where we are, or close to where we are, at Camp Dubois. All right, we've just moved into another section of the museum. And as we move into this area, I want you to think about, say for the sake of argument that you're getting ready to go out on this big expedition. You're going to be gone 1.5 years to 2 years. There are no resupply points, there's no grocery stores, there's no hospitals. What would you take with you? That's kind of what this area is exploring in kind of this recreation of Camp Dubois. In addition to asking the question of what you would take with you on this expedition, you also have to ask who would you take with you. So here on this panel, it talks about selecting the men for the Corps of Discovery. William Clark, in his journal, says a number of young men wish to accompany Captain Lewis and myself on the expedition. That's from the 2nd of January, 1804. So he would have made that entry while here at the camp. And again, not everybody who applied and wanted to go could go. So it says here that at Camp River Dubois, Clark listed 26 men in the permanent detachment, along with 2 captains and Clark's slave York. These guys got regular Army pay and land grants after the expedition, and then with the extra boatmen departing the group, they numbered about 48 people. So think about who you would need on this trip. Okay, you're going to need blacksmiths. Okay, you're going to need somebody who can cook. You're going to need people who can shoot, who can hunt, who can fish, who can just have good rivercraft and woodsmanship. All right, so not only are we looking at what we need to take, but we're also looking at who we need to take. Once the men of the Corps of Discovery arrived in this location in December of 1803, it was going to be about 4 months before the transfer of ownership took place from the Spanish to the French and then to the United States. And then the Corps was going to have to wait even longer while, ice cleared up off of the river and things like that so that they could set out. So they had to build a winter quarters here at Camp Dubois. So here in this section, it's talking about, the building of these cabins. And again, we'll go out and look at the reconstructed camp here in just a little bit. But they also talk about the gathering of supplies. So if we go over here, actually we'll take a quick peek inside right here. So they show the inside of one of these quarters, pretty basic. We talked about how there are going to be efforts to reach out to the tribes of Native Americans in the West. So one of the things that they would bring along with them are these peace medals that had Jefferson's likeness on them. And these were struck in 3 sizes. They had 2, 3, and 4-inch diameter medals that they brought with them. And also, if we go over here, we're going to get back to this keelboat here in just a second. Well, here are some other things that they are bringing with them. Okay, they are bringing beads. Okay, they're bringing metal cups and lanterns. Okay, there are all kinds of different things that they are going to be bringing along with them. And here is a list of some of the gifts for the Indians. Blankets, cloths, handkerchiefs, coats. I'm seeing 55 fish spears or gigs, axes. So a lot of practical things, and then also 130 rolls of pigtail tobacco, looking glasses. So things that the tribes of the West would not have had access to, are being brought along as gifts. All right, so you've got all your men, you've got your supplies, and you are ready to go. How are you going to make this expedition up the Missouri River? Well, the answer is in this vessel right here. This is a keelboat. It is 55 foot long and would have been the primary vessel that the Corps of Discovery would have used to carry their crew up the Missouri River. And here you can see these log supports. This is for when the boat was in, for lack of a better term, dry dock, to keep it supported. The Mississippi River was a little bit volatile. It would, rise and fall, and was pretty unpredictable. So this helped to stabilize the boat while the Corps of Discovery was in their winter encampment. And you got to keep in mind, obviously, it's 1804. There's no motor that's on the back of this thing. So how are they going to go upstream in this mighty current? Well, if it's a nice windy day, they could raise a sail and it could help to move them up the river. If it was more of a calm day, well, then the answer is you get your men on the oars and you start rowing upstream. If you get into shallow water and can't row, well, then the answer is to get long poles, and all of the men would push this boat upriver. And then if the water, again, gets way too shallow, if there's a sandbar, you're talking about just raw manpower. They would get ropes and tie it off on the edge of the boat and then just pull this massive structure upstream, which I can't even imagine. Fully loaded, this was 8 to 10 tons. Just absolutely incredible. One thing they've done with this keelboat model that I really like is they've split it in half to show us how this keelboat would have been loaded up and also how it would have been built. So we're just going to take kind of a little speed run through here and look at the interior of the keelboat. So in addition to food and medical supplies and gifts and things like that, well, these guys are also going to be taking lots of gunpowder and lots of ammunition. So here you can see a small cannon that is mounted on the front. They didn't know exactly who they were going to be going up against. Of course, they're going to be hunting along the way as well. Something that is kind of interesting is these powder boxes were in lead containers. So after it was empty, they could melt it down and then use the melted lead to form more bullets. Another thing that they're going to be bringing a lot of is these barrels of salted pork to kind of supplement their rations as they go along. Okay, if you have some days where the hunting or the fishing is not good, you can dig into this. Okay, here is a list of the weaponry that they're bringing along with them. Okay, so they got some 1795 Harper's Ferry muskets, U.S. Army rifle, blunderbusses, 500 rifle flints. Okay, so I'm seeing all kinds of different things that they are bringing along with them. And then down below decks, where you can see, well, they have these storage lockers where they are keeping all of these goods. So keep in mind that not only do they have to pack this stuff, but they also have to make sure that it is properly balanced as they go upriver. Yeah, so this is really, really fascinating. And again, I'm not showing everything just for the sake of time, but along the way, they are telling us like exactly what was on the manifest. So here we're looking at all of the scientific instruments that are being brought along. So protractors, thermometers, 100 quills, compasses, all right, all kinds of different things here. Yeah, this is really helping me to understand and appreciate the Corps of Discovery a lot more. We've popped back outside now, and that museum was really, really interesting and maybe a little bit dangerous, because that has really sparked my interest in the Lewis and Clark expedition, even more than the interest I already had. And now I'm thinking even more seriously about doing a trip up the Missouri River, maybe even all the way to the Pacific, following the route of Lewis and Clark. One other thing that I wanted to show here. Now, again, Camp Dubois is gone. The original site, has been erased from history. But William Clark had a few sketches of the camp, and we also know some of the approximate measurements. So here on this site, right by the museum, they have a reconstructed camp that gives us an idea of the place where the Corps of Discovery spent the winter of 1803 into 1804. So here we have a look at the reconstructed camp. Now, originally there would have been a wall around the perimeter, and we can't go inside any of these structures, but they do have some photos on the outside that we can take a look at. So here is what the inside of this one would have looked like. So this would have been kind of like the main headquarters. You can see that it's got fireplace and chimney. Some of these other smaller structures would not have that. I'll show you. I just already took a walk through here and looked at it before I started filming. So I'll show you in a moment what the inside of one of like the troop quarters would have looked like. But yeah, starting in December of 1803, the men of the Corps of Discovery would have started hacking out logs and building structures very much like these right here. Oh yeah, here's what I was going to show. You can see that in some of these, rather than having a fireplace, they had stones that were set up in the corner where they could build a small fire. And I'm going to be right honest, I don't know what you would do about the smoke situation. That seems like it would get a little bit smoky in there. But right around on this side, they also have a wash house back here. Clark, in his journal entries on the 1st of January, mentions that, there are locals who are coming around and interacting with these men, and there was a woman who came up and offered her services as someone who could do the laundry and wash their clothes. And then on the 6th of January, there's another journal entry that talks about a couple of men who got drunk and neglected their duties. So as punishment, they had to build a wash house for this woman to do her work in. Okay, so here's what, again, the inside of this building looked like at one point. And then, again, just another one of the troop quarters here. So this is what is housing the Corps of Discovery during the winter of 1803 and 1804, as they were gathering supplies and prepping to go on this epic journey into what was for them the unknown West. All right, so that was a little bit on the winter encampment of Lewis and Clark. Now that I'm here, I'm really wishing that I would have set aside some time to do this whole route up the Missouri River, following the path of Lewis and Clark. Maybe that'll be something for a future series. But for now, we're going to hop in the car and go to another spot that is associated with Lewis and Clark, but that will be in the next episode.